With only 72 days until the general election comes November 5th, we are faced with a Senate that could go either way, whether that be for a Republican majority under a Trump-Vance ticket or maybe a Democratic majority with Harris and Walz. It could go either way. So let's break down all the races, all the latest polls, and just make sure that we get all the information we can. I've narrowed down exactly what the 8 competitive races are. There are 7 states that are swingy in the presidential election, and there's 8 in this one. So there's a little bit more studying you have to do. But we do also have the polling market that shows that Republicans have a 71% odds. This is the bettor's odds of retaining control of the Senate. Again, this is super important because you only need 50 seats if you have the presidency. So if Vance breaks the ties, that's a different calculus than if Harris wins and the Senate goes for Walz breaking the ties, much like Kamala has been for this past administration. So again, Democrats are at a measly sub 30% odds of actually winning the Senate themselves, to get 51 seats, that is, though. But it's more complicated when we include ties. That being said, we do have percentages exactly for what the betting odds are right now in all the swing states, but we also have aggregate polls too. As you can see here with Montana, this is probably one of the first states you want to talk about. So as you can see here, Montana is a state that Trump obviously is winning right now by like 20, 30 points. And Jon Tester, who historically has been a pretty good blue dog Democrat, and even in elections where a person like Trump has won by a ton, he's been able to defeat lackluster Republicans across the board, evidenced by 2018. This election is very different, though. Aside from a potential blue wave, in the last decade, we've really not seen a race that has been close. The polling has been saying the opposite, but obviously I know this, and you can see right now that Tim Sheehy, the Republican, is leading by upwards of 5 percentage points. This is huge, obviously, because the polls were saying, like I said, the contrary. But it became very clear that, Jon Tester will not get over 30% of Trump voters to cross the aisle and actually vote for him down ballot. It's just the way it works. And so he's pretty much donezo. Again, the gambling says so too. There's 2 to 3 odds that the Republican will win this race, so that's pretty conclusive. Virginia is a state that I kind of left as a swing one because when Biden was on the ticket, it seemed like people down ballot were panicking, including Democrats, including people like Tim Kaine. But now that Kamala is on the ballot, it honestly somewhat polarizes the election in a way to where any state that has gone 10 plus points Democrat in the past will stay the same. And so with that being said, even though Kamala might lose to Trump in November, she could actually help raise the floor of Democrats across the board. Interesting. So when you look at this that way, you'll notice that the gambling is also not telling a pretty story. In fact, Virginia has a 94% odds of going Democrat at the Senate level, and that makes sense, okay? This is a state that Kamala will almost definitely win just because she's a Democrat, and Joe won the state in 2020 by about 10. So again, this is a very underleveraged position for the Republican. And so even though Hung Kao seems to be a solid candidate, Tim Kaine also has all the connections, all these elite beltway sort of fundraisers that are really synonymous with the victory in the state of Virginia. And so for that reason, we're going to leave that blue for now. But addressing some of the other big states, we also have, as you can see, Ohio's an extremely difficult thing to parse through because realistically speaking, we don't have a good gauge as to what's going to happen in November. The reason that I say this is because Trump is likely to win in November, the state of Ohio, by about 10 percentage points. In fact, in 2020, despite losing nationally, he still won Ohio by several points. And so that leads you to think that honestly a Republican would do pretty well in the Senate. But in this race, you have Sherrod Brown, who's been there for decades. And beyond this, he also has an appeal that is somewhat intangible and hard to perceive. But basically, you can gauge it the best I can try. And it's that he has this sort of the bona fides of a working class sort of politician and a guy who will try to appeal to the blue collar worker way more than you could imagine the standard neoliberal Democrat can. That being said, we saw people like Tim Ryan, who tried to play that same angle, get triumphed by J.D. Vance in an order of about 6 percentage points. That was the margin for Senate in the last election. 24 presents a different problem. Of course, Sherrod has more of a reason to say that he will actually defend the worker in Ohio, and so it's a difficult proposition as to ascertain who would win. That being said, of course, we do have Brown leading in the polls, evidently by 5. This has been the stagnant amount that it's been, this polling result is not really surprising. Again, the most recent one was from 2 weeks ago. by Rasmussen, which is a pretty Republican-friendly one, or even Remington or Fabrizio, and they still have Brown up by 5 points on average. Not a good sign, but again, I think this is going to change. I feel like, in order for Trump to win by 10 and Brown to win by 5, you would need about a quarter of Trump voters to vote for Brown. It really doesn't check out. You could view this like the diet version of the Montana race, where you have a red state blue incumbent who is in trouble. Now, obviously, Montana is much more Republican than is Ohio, so that's really the quandary we face right now. But insofar as the betting goes, you'll notice that Ohio is 56% odds of going Democrat, despite it also being 44% odds of Bernie Moreno, the Republican candidate, to win that seat. And so it's a difficult thing to predict. As of right now, it is blue according to the latest polls, so we're going to respect that aspect of my video. But let's also consider that this is likely to change. In fact, I'm pretty sure Sherrod Brown loses in November, but we'll see. We'll see. Looking to Pennsylvania, this is a pretty difficult state for Republicans to win for two main reasons. First is a strong Democrat incumbent. The second would be that the Republican is not a great candidate. What do I mean? Rich McCormick does not have a solid history in Pennsylvania politics. He does not appeal to the people that you would want to appeal to. And so as a politician, I don't think he's the greatest guy. That being said, though, again, this is all on paper. I never met him. But Bob Casey, on the other hand, has decades in the Senate, kind of like Sherrod Brown, where you all of a sudden have somebody who can clearly say that I've done X and Y, and then has this appeal, and people can understand why that is the case. And so anyway, to appeal to the authority of seniority, this is actually pretty important. Historically, obviously, incumbents win almost every single time. I'd say like north of 80% of the time. And when it comes down to a swing state, while Trump might win Pennsylvania by a few points, can Casey win it by 7 or 8 percentage points according to these polls? I somewhat doubt that. I somewhat doubt that. Will he win by 3 or 4 like Emerson and Rasmussen says? I can totally see that, but let's look at the betting odds. You'll notice that Pennsylvania has the proclivity of being an 86% odds of being won by Bob Casey Jr. That's kind of insane odds, but you know what? You could see it for what it is, okay? Bob Casey has outperformed even Barack Obama in 2012, I believe. And so for him to be good in Pennsylvania makes a ton of sense. Again, you would have to see the Republican for Senate, McCormick, do worse than Trump almost definitely in order for this to be the case, which honestly is pretty likely because Trump has an appeal that McCormick does not, and that's pretty plain to see. And so I think the Democrats will more than likely retain Pennsylvania, and if they don't, that's a big night for Republicans. But we're going to move on to another state. I think the next one we want to address is going to be Michigan. Michigan is an interesting one because Slotkin is leading right now by 5. That being said, the polling hasn't really heated up too much, and so there's still plenty of time for this to change in the state of Michigan. That being said, Trump is currently losing to Kamala in the polls in Michigan by 2 on average, and so for Slotkin to do 3 points better is very interesting. Slotkin is in a really weird position because you have a person who is a neoliberal, good at fundraising, and she's Jewish. So again, that might run a face to a niche amount of Democratic voters that are Arab or whatever. And you have Mike Rogers, who again is a pretty normal Republican. But is that really going to cut it when in Michigan you want to appeal in specific to certain issues? Like, for example, if you had like a union president somehow that was Republican, that'd do fantastic. We don't have that. And so the Republican Party seems to be in a weird position. If you look at the betting odds, you'll notice that Democrats have a 77% chance of winning it. And so it is likely that the Democrats will pull this out. But I have a counter narrative to this. If Trump ends up winning Michigan by north of 1 percentage point, then odds are then whatever generic Republican behind him will also likely win. Now, again, this could be wrong, but polarization makes it so that it's really hard to see any sort of concrete ticket splitting, namely in Michigan, whereas obviously in Pennsylvania, you might see it a little more, especially with a good candidate like Bob Casey. But Slotkin doesn't seem to have this amazing prowess as a politician that I've seen recently, but we'll see if there's debates and how those line up, but those probably would have a crazy impact on this election for Senate. But let's move on to Wisconsin, the state right over the lake. You'll notice that Tammy Baldwin is leading by 6.7 percentage points, which is a ton in a swing state. And in fact, she's winning in every single poll over the past 2 or 3 months, except for a tied one by Remington Research. Also, look at this. Well, I can see it. But anyway, Harris is leading in Wisconsin by 1. And so this is interesting for a couple different reasons. So Baldwin is doing over 5 points better than Hovde and better than Kamala. Interesting. Now, this could be for a multitude of reasons. Chief among them that obviously Kamala does not appeal to the white working class voter. I can just say that. And beyond this, I also think that Tammy Baldwin fits it better, the role to appeal to those types. But also, she is the incumbent beyond just any sort of normal convention. That's like the most basic one. Are you the incumbent or not? So she's going to have name recognition over Eric Hovde, who is not like the celebrity or anything. He seems to be a photogenic person and does fit the on-paper role to run for Senate in Wisconsin. The question is, will he have the money to really compete against a cavalcade of ads and all that you could imagine the Democrats, all this money they'll pour into the state? Hovde will likely not be able to do that and not even spend half as much or fundraise a quarter as much as Baldwin. It seems like a high bar to get over. But can Trump's coattails actually lift him up is the question. It's a very daunting task. As you can see here, Baldwin has an 83% odds of winning right now. I do predict personally that the polls will narrow, as obviously there's not that many people that would say, wow, I really love Baldwin and I'm also voting Trump. So it just doesn't really make sense for Baldwin to win this seat by 7 percentage points as being predicted in Wisconsin. But let's also keep in mind, folks, that she is over 50% in the polling, which is a fantastic result. Again, if you're at over 50% in a 1v1, then you're pretty much winning every single time. But the polls have been wrong before. So honestly, if Trump wins the state by a few points or even better, then yes, Hovde would probably win because, again, Hovde is not like a hated guy. It's just like he's more of an unknown quantity, and he hasn't had the fundraising yet to really get himself out there as compared to Baldwin. Things are likely to change, though. If there's a debate and he wins and Trump does pretty well in Wisconsin, he could pull it out narrowly, the Senate seat. But until then, we're going to leave it blue. But as for the state of Nevada, let's get right into it. So as you can see here, Jackie Rosen is leading by 10 points over Sam Brown. This is super unlikely to happen, obviously. Trump right now is leading Nevada by 1.4 percentage points. And so for there to be like a 12% discord is really not making any sense. What likely is the case, though, is that Jackie Rosen will do better than Kamala, probably, but also that Sam Brown is being severely underestimated. In fact, I see this somewhat kind of like Wisconsin, just that I feel like Trump is going to do better in Nevada than Wisconsin. So therefore, the coattails will be a lot longer to grab onto and for Brown to actually win this, not on his own merit, but just more so because you're a Republican sharing the ballot with Donald Trump. Keep in mind that in 2022, and actually, if you look at it, Nevada, for the most part, has been getting more Republican every election from 2016 on to 22 and predictably in 24 as well. Adam Laxalt came super close to winning his election for Senate. And there's a lot of indicators that would point to the fact that Republicans will do better in the Senate this time around. So yeah, the polls don't really show that. But honestly, these polls are also having a ton of undecideds. This is a very low-key, nerdy observation, so like the video if you appreciate the game I'm about to give you. So look here. So while Rosen, you have normal numbers like 48, 47, 49, 50, even 54 percentage points. You could see this. But Brown's numbers are unrealistic. Like, okay, look, 40, 39, 36, 40. Again, that's not a realistic number to have. Brown, if he loses, would at least get, like 47% of the votes, something like this. Lose narrowly, but still. So these numbers are just not very indicative of what's going to happen. That being said, I think the most accurate of the latest polls came like about 6 weeks ago, believe it or not, by Remington Research that posits that Rosen is winning by 2. The only reason why I lend that one more credibility over the others is because you look at the numbers and they make the most sense. Come November 5th, what makes more sense to you? Rosen 50, Brown 39, or would you say it's actually Remington that says Rosen 48, Brown 46? That's a lot more reasonable. And what you'll notice is that there's about a 6% undecided in that survey that they committed to, which means that obviously there's some breathing room for Brown to make up the difference. That being said, we'll consult the betting. As you can see here, the betting odds have Nevada going 80% likely to Rosen over the Republican Sam Brown at a measly 20 percentage point odds of winning. So realistically speaking, it is the Democrats' seat to lose, and so they're more likely to not to win it. But we'll see in November if Trump's coattails will lift up people like Hovde, people like Bernie Moreno, etc. We'll see. But last but not least is Arizona. Arizona is a super complicated state for a myriad of different reasons. Okay, right now, Donald Trump is winning the state of Arizona against Harris by zero point 0.2 percentage points. 0.2. Now, that means that there's literally no coattails. There's no cushion here. And so my whole hypothesis had been that, Kari Lake is pretty downtrodden, like, polling wise, but, the coattails from Trump should save her. But that was when Biden was the nominee. Trump was winning Arizona by like 6. So yeah, could Kari afford to lose some of the Trump vote and still win by a point or 2? Sure, but it's not the case anymore. In fact, it looks like Trump is going to have a hard time even winning Arizona. Least of all of your problems, and I'm being sarcastic here, is this abortion initiative that has officially been greenlit to be on the ballot. This is huge. Huge. Abortion is a thing that is very popular when it comes to like the conventional Roe v. Wade nomenclature. And so for this to be something in a purple state like ours, I live in Arizona, it's a horrible look for Kari Lake, because she, in passing, I think a few years ago, must have said that she supported one of the rules we had as a state, like in the 1800s, that was like pro-life. And it just makes her look awful. Again, you can't really blame her for that because she had no idea that the Dobbs decision would have happened, but it's a big political fumble now that you really look at it with hindsight. That being said, though, let's look at this. Gallego is leading Lake by 6.7 percentage points. Again, that's really rough. It's looking like the margin that Baldwin is winning over Hovde, with a couple distinct differences, though. The polling has been richer than it has been in Wisconsin. So if you look at the most recent polling, you could have a pollster like Rasmussen that has Trump winning by like 3 against Kamala now, has Gallego up by 8. I feel like that's inaccurate, but still really bad looking. But let's look at the betting odds. Arizona right now is at an 81% odds of going to Gallego over Lake at under 20%. Really bad. So as of right now, it is blue. But I'll elaborate on my position here. It's pretty obvious, though, that kind of like Nevada, it will narrow down. Again, Kari's numbers, for the most part, have been 41, 47, 42, 42, 42, 40. These are not realistic, okay? There's too many undecideds right now. As we get closer to November, you'll see Gallego probably being at like 50% and Lake at like 47. And so it's more so like a few points that you're behind by Kari, and not so much, again, being down by like 8 or 9 or 10 like other people are saying either. But that's still a pretty disadvantageous position to be in. The name of the game for this campaign, and I'll probably make a video on this specifically, comment down below if you want to see it, but it goes down to, can you paint Gallego as worse than Harris, or, a socialist, or whatever you want to call him, and can Kari Lake get all the Trump vote? Okay, not so much win over the middle, that's kind of like a foregone conclusion, but can you get 99% of the Trump vote? If Trump is poised to win Arizona by like 2, given the abortion initiative on the ballot, then you got to make sure virtually every single Trump voter is going for Lake, because if not, she's going to lose. Now, what I want you guys to look up as your homework before I end is going to be, look up the 2022 Senate election, the 2020 presidential election in Arizona. Trump basically ties against Joe Biden, but Martha McSally against Mark Kelly loses by like 2 or 3. So I had predicted the whole time, like, hey, Trump's going to win Arizona by like 3, and so then McSally will win by like half a point. Now, God knows what happened 4 years ago anyway, but the point being is, like, my basic logic was correct, that she would lag him by a few points. And I was correct, obviously. And so I think a lot of the same math applies to Lake. I think Lake will run behind Trump by a few points, and but not too many. And so you really are looking at how much Trump really wins by, and then see if those coattails are long enough to grab onto the helicopter before it flies off the pad, and you're kind of stuck losing this election. And so for right now, Arizona is more likely than not going blue Senate-wise. So right now we have a Republican majority of 51 seats to the Democrats' 49. You can totally see why this is going to be the case if things don't change. So in the next 72 days, let's see if they do. So like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Adios.